This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
From Philadelphia to Erie and from Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenwald, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Mara Donnelly. Mara, it doesn't look like you're in the studio with me.
No, I'm not in the studio with you.
You must be on location, right?
I am on location. I hope that we are back in the studio when we film soon.
I hope so too. Very, very much hope so. But we have a very special guest with us today, someone who's been with us before, but not in the same capacity. We have a large question in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and that is about schools and the upcoming fall term. Will we be back in school or not? And one of the best persons to talk about this in regard to higher education, of course, is Dr. Jamie Martin. Jamie, welcome to the show. You are the newly elected, the newly minted president of APSCUF, the Association of Pennsylvania State Colleges and University Faculty. Congratulations on your election.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. I think maybe the good place to start would, so that our viewers have an opportunity to learn a little bit about you. Could you tell us a little bit about your professional background, Jamie?
Sure. All of my degrees are from IUP and actually in criminology and criminal justice. So I started my career as a probation officer, and as I continued my education, ended up as a professor, which was my favorite position so far. I recently served as the chair of our department, so I got to see that part of academia as well. And I was thrilled and honored to have been elected president of APSCUF, but I have huge shoes to fill in following Dr. Ken Mash. But I was his vice president for 6 years, so I got to learn a lot about the state level APSCUF and state politics, but still a pretty daunting task to follow in his great footsteps. He was a remarkable president.
He was, and full disclosure, of course, I have to reveal that I am a member of this union, as serving at Millersville University. So just so our viewers know that. Maura?
Well, thank you so much for being here. As Charlie said, you were elected in April, so you pretty much stepped right into a firestorm with COVID-19. And, you know, just from a personal perspective, what's it been like to have had to tackle such an enormous issue right off the bat?
And actually, I was elected in April, but my term started June 1st. So I'm very new in the position, but quite honestly, facing the pandemic has been challenging. I kept saying I was hoping for a more boring start to my presidency. So I'm not even yet in Harrisburg because it's been difficult for me to be able to get there and even work with realtors. So I'm still in Indiana, Pennsylvania. Of course, when the pandemic hit and students went home for spring break and didn't return, that had an impact on universities and faculty as well. So as we tried to go from face-to-face to remote, so we're now facing what's happening in the upcoming fall. But certainly the pandemic and then all of the social unrest and calls for social justice has made this an interesting transition.
How do you think your professors transitioned? How well do you think they did? It had to have been extremely challenging.
Yeah, it was, again, I'll use the word remarkable, but the fact that, you know, we came back or planned to come back and all of a sudden discovered we couldn't, and they had to pivot immediately in probably about 8 days and move things from face-to-face to online. And it's challenging, but I think it's just a testament to how talented our faculty are, that they figured it out quickly and made it as good of a learning environment for our students across the 14. So again, the testament goes to all of them for being able to do that. And I think for our students also to be able to adjust to that new norm, new reality for them for that last 8 weeks or so.
Well, Jamie, it seems that in my estimation, APSCUF has done a fantastic job of keeping its membership informed about what is happening on the 14 campuses and what we might expect. We also have a chancellor who, I don't know, I want your opinion, but he was faced with a lot of challenges fairly quickly. It seems that he's responded very well, but from your point of view, what has the Chancellor's Office in PASCI, the Pennsylvania system, what have they had to do during this pandemic and to prepare for the fall? Wonder if you could give our viewers an idea of how daunting a task it might be.
Sure. I mean, they had to move all of their employees to a remote location as well. So they've been working away from the Dixon Center. And then, as you can imagine, they have different things happening at every university, concerns about students getting them safely home, doing planning for the fall. I think at all 14, we had some students who literally didn't have any place to go. So we had students that were remaining on campus in residence halls and determining how do we make sure that they're safe, and how do we deal with dining options. And also had to deal with the financial realities of returning tuition dollars, returning fees and residence hall options, those kinds of refunds. And so they had to deal with fiscal reality as well, as did the faculty.
So what, I understand that a couple of universities have already announced their plan to return, which is very encouraging. I'm sure their students are doing. Can you tell us a little bit about what we know so far on universities opening up in the fall?
I think at this point, Mara, there are different scenarios at probably each of the 14. And so some have announced that we're going to be back face to face, but those seem to be plans that are in progress. Trying to determine if we bring students back. Some universities thinking we'll bring them back early, finish by Thanksgiving, so that they would go home at Thanksgiving break and not return after that. Some looking at the modified calendar, some thinking about would we break the semester into 2 chunks of 7.5 weeks. I think it's in progress. My concern is bringing thousands of students back and not having a plan in place for cleaning protocols, a plan in place for vulnerable populations, whether it be faculty, staff, or students. So I think that will be the challenge. And I know that there are faculty and university administrators and the Chancellor's Office working on that and trying to interpret the guidelines from the CDC and the PDE as we move forward. But there are still lots of questions. Even in my mind, I don't know what the national stockpile is of protective gear, protective masks, and how are we going to make sure that everybody has that kind of equipment as you go into the classrooms, and how do we make sure that there's social distancing in classrooms, and all of those kinds of questions. So I think there are plans that are in progress, but I know that there are some to bring students back to campus.
So there can't possibly be a roadmap on how to do this because it's never happened before. It does look like, I would assume they would help each other out and with ideas and plans. Are there just talks going on and idea sharing happening?
I believe so, and that would probably be occurring at some level at the state system of higher education between the chancellor and the university presidents. But then on each campus there are again, it varies, but work groups, different planning groups that can include faculty, staff, and administrators. You're trying to work through all of the issues that would exist. So I think there are probably communications across the 14, but we even have circumstances where the level of the virus was much higher in certain areas than others. So, Westchester, Millersville, for example, they're in an area that had more cases. But the thing you have to remember is, even if you're in Indiana County or Edinburgh, you have students coming from all across the Commonwealth. Right. So how do you deal with, making sure that everybody's healthy, everybody's safe? So I think those are going to be the challenges. And certainly we have concerns for faculty who might be in a vulnerable population or live with somebody that is vulnerable to this virus. And how do we protect everybody in that regard?
It's difficult with working on these statistics For example, for Millersville being located in Lancaster County has a large concentration of retirement homes. And that concentration of the elderly tends to distort the statistics and affects Millersville's return, for example. So many factors to take into account. But Jamie, one of the biggest ones, and we've talked with Ken about this many times, is of course the state budget that's dedicated to higher education. We find that many people believe that we are spending foolishly, or we're spending great amounts of money on education and higher education, when in fact you can tell us, I guess, that state spending for higher education is at an all-time low. I was wondering if you could address that and the challenges that that poses for us, and what kind of a budget is happening in Harrisburg right now.
We were level funded, so receiving the same amount as we did last year. I think there are also going to be some monies coming through the federal stimulus package, the CARES package, that would help out a little bit. But I've talked often about the fact that, I was an undergraduate at IUP, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago. But at that time, the state legislature was funding about 75% of students' education, with the students funding the other 25% in tuition. And now that has flipped. So we do hear about, getting whatever allocation, but the fact of the matter is we're somewhere between 47th through 50th in the support for higher education. We're one of the most expensive state-owned systems in the entire country. And so that has an impact. My personal experience was that as a professor, I'd have students come into my office saying, I can't afford the books for your class. We have food pantry on campuses because we have students that are food insecure. So when you put all of that together, we're seeing that students are leaving our institutions with a huge amount of student debt. We're also locking out, to some extent, the students for whom this system was created, to provide a high quality education for Pennsylvania students. And so for a lot of low income students around the Commonwealth, they're not having the advantage of being able to attend one of our universities. And going back to my own experience, if I were, I'm a first generation college student, if I were in the position of some of our students now, I probably wouldn't be able to afford to attend. So we look at the loss for those students and their communities because of how expensive our state universities have become.
Well, Jamie, welcome to the presidency. This is definitely a turbulent time that you are entering this important office at, but we know that you'll do well, and we're looking forward to you coming and giving us updates on the show in the near future.
Thank you so much again.
You're quite welcome.